Vendetta by Lara E. Sims. Narrated by Nathan Beatty. Copyright 2019 by Lara Elizabeth Sims. Part 1. Prologue. Wednesday, 14th of August, 2047. Thanks, Ed, Dr. Thomas Seabrook said, putting his empty beer bottle on the bar so that his brother-in-law, who was bartender today, could dispose of it easily. A large group of businessmen, having a liquid lunch business meeting, had caused Thomas to abandon his solitary table in the corner. He could hardly hear himself think, and anyway he had presents to buy. His wife Courtney was turning 40 on Monday, and he was still to pick out a suitable second gift. This would be his last chance. She was a nurse and was working a shift. They had both taken the rest of the week off, and Thomas couldn't wait. Things had been more hectic at work than usual just lately. It was probably because his boss, Dr. Adrian Benson, was retiring at the end of the year. Thomas and his bitter rival, Dr. Brett Carr, were in direct competition to replace him as clinical lead. It was difficult to say who would win. Thomas was the more accomplished doctor, if experience was what they were looking for. Then the thing was already in the bag. However, Brett was very popular with the hospital management, so he might conceivably snatch the job from under Thomas's nose. Thomas never allowed himself to consider working with Brett as his superior. The thought depressed him too much. He really would have to consider his options then. Was he really prepared to uproot his entire future again? Edward Hunter raised a hand in a farewell wave. He was rushed off his feet, and Thomas hoped that he would have some help this afternoon. Otherwise he would never cope, experienced though he was. He was struck again how unalike his wife and Edward were for twins born only 5 minutes apart. While Courtney had auburn hair and emerald green eyes, Edward had blonde hair, which lay across his forehead. His eyes were a piercing shade of sapphire blue. The way her hair shone in the sunlight was what had first attracted Thomas to Courtney in the first place. They had met in his native New York, where Courtney had worked briefly. She had been using the name Alice then. He had agonized for weeks about asking her for a date, but then there had been a doctor's and nurse's Christmas dance held in November. He had thought that it was the perfect opportunity to ask her to go as his partner. However, before he could pluck up his courage to approach her, one of the consultants had bragged that she had agreed to go as his date for the evening. Thomas had been completely crushed, but at the event she had been sitting alone at a table. Emboldened by this, he had asked her to dance. She had agreed, and then they had spent the rest of the evening talking. It turned out that the consultant had lied. Shortly after the dance, Courtney had announced that she was expecting Thomas's baby. She had to return to England, though, and didn't think the relationship could continue. Thomas had resigned from his job and emigrated to go in search of her. The rest was history. 10 years and 6 children later, they were blissfully happy. The only problem was the Timberlake family, the Irish equivalent of the Mafia, who had caused Courtney and her family to flee for New York in the first place. They blamed Courtney's estranged grandfather for something that had happened decades ago. He was long dead, but their memory seemed to stretch into infinity. It was less about the Timberlakes themselves now, since Edward had become friends with the leader, but a few troublesome employees of his, both current and former. Courtney had been kidnapped last year and attacked by one employee before her parents had rescued her. Thomas had been unsure for a while who had fathered their youngest daughter, Summer. It had turned out that Thomas was the father, but the employee had found out and tried to claim her as his own just a few weeks ago. Thomas himself had been mistaken for someone else back in January and had been held prisoner for 3 days before the mistake had been realized. A movement caught his eye, and he looked up. He shivered. Someone who looked very like his nemesis was staring straight at him. It must just be because he was thinking of that particular unpleasant employee. Little did he know that he would very soon live to regret such an assumption. Chapter 1. Thomas lingered for a good half an hour, choosing the perfect set of earrings for Courtney. He was torn between 2 pairs. Both were expensive, and while she was worth every penny, in his opinion, he really couldn't afford both pairs. He was glad that new designs of earrings were made all the time, because otherwise he would have to shop elsewhere. He had bought her earrings at least once a year.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?